Our next speaker is Brian Hooker, PhD. Brian is the Chief Scientific Officer at Children's Health Defense, an organization committed to the best health for children in the U.S. and worldwide. He's also an emeritus professor of biology at Simpson University in Redding, California, where he specialized in microbiology and biotechnology. Dr. Hooker has many accomplishments to his credit, including co-inventor for 5 patents, recipient of the Battelle Entrepreneurial Award in 2001, and a Federal Laboratory Consortium Recognition Award in 1999 for his work on reactive transport in 3 dimensions. The breadth of Dr. Hooker's over 80 science and engineering papers have been published in internationally recognized peer-reviewed journals. His most recent publications focus on the epidemiology of vaccine adverse events. Dr. Hooker has been active in the vaccine safety world since 2001 and has a 27-year-old son who sustained severe injuries from his infant vaccines. In 2013 and 2014, Dr. Hooker worked with a CDC whistleblower, Dr. William Thompson, to expose fraud and corruption within the vaccine safety research in the CDC, which led to the release of over 10,000 pages of documents. Please welcome Dr. Brian Hooker.
Thank you so much, and good afternoon, everyone. I usually wing it, so this is kind of weird, but we'll go ahead and do prepared remarks. After my son's vaccine injury in 1999, I started investigating the role that vaccines played in causing autism, and was very interested in the research at the CDC regarding the connection between thimerosal-containing vaccines and autism, as well as the MMR vaccine and autism. By 2001, I was directly contacting CDC epidemiologists in charge of these studies, and very quickly noticed that any questions I had regarding the methodologies that were employed or preliminary results that they were obtaining, these questions were brusquely blown off with non-answers and extremely unscientific statements. In my first encounter, this was back in about 2003, with CDC whistleblower Dr. William Thompson, when I asked him about thimerosal, he stated that my daughter received all the same thimerosal-containing vaccines as your son, and she's doing just fine. Okay. Needless to say, I did not let him get away with such an unscientific statement in the N of 1 experiment he was evidently conducting in his own home. As my questions became more direct and pointed, CDC officials sought to look for ways to disqualify me from directly interacting with them as a scientific colleague. As I found out later, they secretly contacted the Department of Justice attorneys selected to oppose the petitioners, i.e. the children, in the omnibus autism proceedings of the National Vaccine Injury Compensation Program, in order to see if my son was indeed a petitioner in that program. They also did the same for Sally Bernard of Safe Minds, who was also asking them direct questions about vaccines and autism. In my son's case, we had filed for compensation under the NVICP and soon received a cease and desist letter from Ms. Deborah Tress, an attorney from the CDC, who claimed that I was using information from my investigation of the CDC as discovery for my son's case. Because discovery is not allowed for petitioners under the rules of the NVICP, Ms. Tress asked me to stop contacting CDC scientists, stating my only recourse was to receive information was through the Freedom of Information Act, as well as through a single community liaison, Ms. Lorene Spencer. My attorney and I read the letter, had a good laugh, and then we sent a letter back saying that it was my right to contact any government official at any point in time. Ms. Tress shot back saying that it was my right to contact government officials, but that CDC officials outside of the FOIA office and Ms. Spencer would simply ignore any of my emails and voicemail messages. Thus, in early 2004, I started filing FOIA requests to the CDC at the rate of 1 per month, which is the maximum allowable number of requests that the CDC FOIA office would consider. Now, little OCD kicked in, and 21 years later, I'm still filing FOIA requests at the rate of 1 per month. There's a 12-step group for me, too. Very quickly, I had amassed quite a research library of emails, reports, memoranda, and other correspondences involving CDC scientists. When I had exhausted my own maximum number of filings, I started recruiting family members to also file FOIA requests to gain even more materials. At one point, I had a team of 5 separate volunteers, each who would file 1 request per month. CDC tried many tactics to discourage my efforts. Individuals who were giving up records for these requests would hide relevant documents that were the subject of my requests within stacks and stacks of irrelevant emails in an attempt to filibuster my efforts to learn the truth about investigations into vaccines and autism. In addition, I would receive invoices for as much as $250,000 per FOIA request for searching, copying, reviewing, and redacting documents that were subjects of my requests. Then in 2013, I received a very providential call from one Dr. William Thompson, the same epidemiologist who brusquely dismissed my concerns about vaccines and autism many years earlier. In this call and a series of exchanges that ensued over the next 10 months, Dr. Thompson was very different and in a way sought forgiveness for his role in the CDC's cover-up of the relationship between vaccines and autism. Bill Thompson released to me thousands of pages of emails, reports, and results of the studies he conducted in the Immunization Safety Office of the CDC. He also revealed the actual background documents showing that the CDC was indeed finding a statistically significant relationship between thimerosal and neurodevelopmental disorders, including autism, as well as the MMR vaccine and neurodevelopmental disorders. He also showed me to the proverbial front door of the CDC where I could directly request public use data sets in order to repeat the analyses of the CDC, which I did straight away for the MMR vaccine. This was the same data used for the DeStefano et al. 2004 pediatric study on the timing of the MMR vaccine and autism prevalence in a cohort of children in metropolitan Atlanta. When I received the data from CDC officials in 2014, within 15 minutes of starting the analysis, I saw that African American males receiving the MMR vaccine on time were over 3.5 times more likely to receive an autism diagnosis compared to those boys who received their first MMR vaccine after their 3rd birthday. I immediately called Bill, and his reaction was, "Oh, you found it." I asked him to explain further what did I find, and he described the whole saga where he found the same results on November 7th, 2001, and the co-authors of the study agonized over what to do with such a compelling finding. To Colleen Boyle, one of the senior authors of the paper, it was easy. Simply roll a bunch of blue recycle bins into the conference room and shred all evidence of the finding. It never happened. They never found it. They published something false in 2004 and moved on. But Bill secretly saved the information and over 10 years later shared it with me in a way that I found the result through my own analysis. It wasn't his sharing the results. It was me getting the data directly through the CDC front door, analyzing the results, and sharing my own findings. That simple. That analysis was published in July 2014 in the journal Translational Neurodegeneration. However, the same day that Bill issued a statement through his attorney revealing the cover-up and supporting my paper, the journal decided to remove my paper from its website, saying initially that it was a threat to public health. Then changing the message to a trumped-up false charge that I had an undisclosed conflict of interest that compromised the original peer review process. Still looking for that conflict of interest. By October 6, 2014, the journal fully retracted the paper after a sham peer review process. I'll be talking more about the retraction in the last panel today, but the retraction changed the narrative of the CDC whistleblower story so the mainstream media could report on the flawed and fraudulent paper of Dr. Brian Hooker, rather than the original flawed and fraudulent paper of CDC scientists Frank DiStefano, Colleen Boyle, Marcia Lang-Juergen Alsop, and Tanya Vassin, and one Bill Thompson. Big Pharma had their out, and now the discussion could revert back to the conclusions of the 2004 IOM Immunization Safety Review Committee with a conflated message: no vaccines ever cause autism, despite the fact that only one vaccine, the MMR, and one vaccine component, thimerosal, have ever been studied as related to the US autism epidemic. And even those studies, as I saw before, were flawed and fraudulent. Since the CDC whistleblower story became public and the scientific establishment and the media tried to change the narrative from fraud within the CDC to a debunked researcher named Brian Hooker, I've continued to study vaccine adverse events, expanding to other chronic conditions related to vaccines, as well as the overall health of vaccinated versus unvaccinated individuals. With Secretary Kennedy as head of HHS, we have a unique opportunity to investigate all of the sins of the past, holding accountable all of those individuals responsible for many cover-ups, not just this one, and clean up the mess left behind based on the lies about vaccines promulgated throughout society. Not only do we need to prevent this from happening in the future, but we need to take care of the many families that suffered and continue to suffer losses at the hands of CDC fraudsters, some that are still employed by the agency. As a parent of an adult son who sustained lifelong, easily preventable yet debilitating vaccine injuries, I feel that jail time is too good for these criminals who knowingly killed and maimed a generation of children. But if jail time is as good as it gets, let's roll, and I'll break out the orange jumpsuits. Thank you.